the map that I created was for the 10th book in the series. So this evolution's been happening for some time now, and like as she continues throughout the series, like she like her blood is being like shifted more and more Fae, and because I wanted to be able to show that like these sort of Fae kingdoms are superimposed on like actual like the geology of the Western United States. I included just like very faintly like the human-made borders, and then like much more intensely the Fae-made borders. And in my mind, that reflected how like Toby's humanity is slowly going by the wayside, and the Fae is getting strong. Yeah, no one picked up on that. Like, I don't even think that Sean picked up on that, and that I put that in there, but it made me happy. So that's what I did. And one of the things that I wanted to do with October Day books is I wanted people to be like look at the map for a few minutes and not even realize, and only go, oh, it's the Western United States, and that has successfully worked. Like I've gotten people like, oh, that's so cool. So, mission accomplished there.
Okay. Hello. Really good? I don't know if this is a trick guy. Hey, oh goodness, in the humor, I lost the question. You have the visual encyclopedia of these things. What's the oldest fake map you've come across, or fantasy map, I suppose?
In terms of like maps actually created for fantastical worlds.
Sure, or strictly just made not to actually, work with reality.
So there's actually a huge number of these in sort of like allegorical and religious texts. Really? So like they will have like Thomas More's Utopia, and like lands that are like described. I think the most ancient one is like thousands of years old, and like some. I wish that I remember the name of the culture that produced it, but it's like their map to the afterlife. So yeah, like there's a lot of those that have come up in various religions, and it's just incredible to see like how they envision that, like how they make sense of their own mortality in a way. And then the earliest fantasy maps, as I guess we kind of tend to think of them, are the ones that I cited, like Robert Louis Stevenson and those contemporaries. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello.
Is the microphone working?
Yeah. Might need to get a little closer.
Okay, so my obsession, I guess, is with science fiction more so than fantasy, and I don't know if this is your area of expertise, but I was wondering if you had any advice for drawing a map of an interstellar civilization and how to make that work.
Yeah, like one of the maps that I've in my childhood, I fangirled the hardest over was the map of the Star Wars universe in the book Vector Prime, and just it lays out the Star Wars galaxy in a beautiful way, and of course because it's such a grand scale, you don't get into you don't get much of a sense of the individual character of each of the planets, but it's just a beautifully illustrated map, and I just love it. I'm sitting in my comic book store, oh, this is it made me very happy. Thank you.
What is your, or have you had experience in trying to make a fake city in a real world type situation?
Yes, I did one of those for the Cinder Spires series from PHXCC, and it essentially gave me the opportunity of, I did 2 maps that represented 2 habitat levels in this massive spire that because the regular environment is just totally unlivable, everyone has to live in these habitats essentially. And one of the habitats, Havel Morning, it was very kind of excruciatingly laid out in a very methodical, planned way, because it's the tip top of this spire, and they have the most natural light. It's the most desirable place in this spire to live, and so it has sort of the most exacting infrastructure. Whereas, and so everything's just on this rigid geometric axis. Then the other map that I did was Havel Landing, where it is it has this very impromptu, like maker culture type attitude where like, we still have like the bones of this city that were laid down by like the initial creators of these spires, but like rather than having like the very strictly laid out like city grid like you would see in like Manhattan, it looked more like old London or old Boston, where like everything was, they created roads where they needed roads, where it made the most sense to them, and they actually like built a second level, like having the vertical space in this habitat, so they could cram like twice as many people and twice as many shops and twice as much everything into this world. And so just like being able to have the visual contrast of those two different cities was a lot of fun to me. Essentially for creating cities, some tips, like look at what maps of cities say about their history. Like if you look at Manhattan and you like think about like people first settled, or at least the Europeans first settled on like kind of the lower end of Manhattan, and so those tended to be more like cattle paths and stuff like that were eventually turned into roads that were eventually made into like actual city streets. And so things are like you have like streets intersecting streets, so that doesn't really make any sense, and that only in kind of the as like more territory was purchased from the natives, and they were actually able to build in a much more methodical, deliberate, planned way. Then it gives way to like the grid that we associate with the rest of Manhattan, and so like that gives you a little history of like the history of how Manhattan was founded. Then a place like Los Angeles, where like a lot of it is very flat, but then you have like all these areas of hills. Like if you look at a map, you can immediately tell like where the geography changes. So you're like grid, and then just like crazy like 10-year-old squiggles happening. And, like okay, that's where the mountains are, and that's where the hills are. So like get a sense of like what the underpinning of your world is, like how much organization was put in to its like actual founding, and yeah, just like give folks a sense of visual history there.
Do you have any advice for someone that's having problems like properly conveying scale to, I guess, readers would be the word, like someone that's trying to explain just how long it would actually take for someone to travel across like the full breadth of the world?
Mm-hmm. That's actually a tough one. I guess like one way of doing it is like depending on like the era at which like your map was created, like there are very different ways that people visualize coastlines. Like before we had the surveying equipment, before we had the trigonometry and stuff, like the way that people drew coastlines, I mean, it hewed very much to like regular, understandable shapes, like you had circular or ovoid patterns with just like a little bit of ziginess, and like straight lines, like right angles, equilateral triangles and stuff. So at least if you were doing a little bit more of a modern day map, then people kind of have a general sense of, just from like seeing maps all of their lives, they have kind of a more understanding of like how large certain like what the scale of things look like, but yeah, that would be much harder to do in sort of more historical map. So unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you in that case. But like if you can find some way of like this like banana for scale sort of thing, like if you can, like you might even like be really hitting the microphone, be like really overt, and like you could have like the main trails or the main like arteries from one city to another, and like you could just say like 10 days on horseback or something. Like a lot of times like different like usually at certain times of development, you would have like the larger towns that were like 1 day's journey away from each other. So like people wouldn't have to like camp out at night in the wilderness. So, but that's also not something that most people know. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer than that, but
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
I was curious, on average, how many like redraws and attempts it takes before you like find the perfect, like the final product?
It depends on how specific the author is. Like when they usually ask for like a back of the napkin scrawling of like how they envision the world, just so I can have a general like sense of scale and proportion. Like sometimes they get it right early. Sometimes they'll have like some tweaks. With that first map I did with Jim, like I'm surprised like he did not like drop kick me into the sun. I mean, like every night I was like, oh, like here's the current version of the map. Like anything you want to change, and like no, that's fine. Like, go away, you're bothering me. And, so yeah, it all depends on your working relationship with the author. One thing that like, to this day continues to vex me is just that moment when the map gels, and you never really know when that moment is going to happen. Like you spend all this time working on a map that it definitely doesn't look complete, it definitely doesn't look polished, and like you're finishing the last of the details, but it just something doesn't look right. And so generally, like after I have mostly finished this map, I'll spend another week just like adding a little bit more like shading to different areas, just like emphasizing other areas, and just like until it looks map-like, I guess. And that's something that I've not been able to like actually quantify in my head. And maybe once I quantify, I'll be spending a lot less time like actually polishing and refining. But yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. Good? Okay. So I'm from the writer's point of view. I can't draw, so I'm not an artist by any means. But one of my favorite authors that I've read, and I've kind of tried to mimic a little bit, just of how he writes, is Stephen King, very detail oriented. But I also feel like that can be a problem. Too much detail can drag on too much. If you're trying to draw a map, whether it be a region or a city, how much detail do you think you should be pulling from the book as an artist? How much detail should I be putting in to try and make that make sense so you can accurately draw it, do you think?
It definitely depends on like the scale that you're wanting to depict in the world. Like if a lot of like one of the things that I ran into with the Alera books is Jim and I wanted the book, the map, to be able to be reprinted in all of the books in the series, and so therefore it wouldn't have like any spoilers for later books, because like a lot of action takes place over the course of the books, and like a lot of the cities are completely destroyed by this like invading presence, and so like the world in the 6th book looks very different from the world in the 1st book. So yeah, we settled early on representing like the totality of this world as seen in the 1st book. But one problem is that like 90% of the action of the 1st book takes place in this like tiny backwater valley that no one particularly cares about in the rest of this culture. And because we also, I was having to balance that again, like, okay, against, yes, this map is representing, or is meant to be representing like Alera and Curia, and like this is the world. This is what like these like wealthy, educated citizens would be looking at, and then the children of citizens. And so why would they care about this little backwater valley? And I came up with 2 reasons to justify like actually having a blow up of that area, so that like people in the 1st book would actually be able to follow along. And that was like, okay, one, that's where the son of the firstborn was killed, and so like that's where his memorial is. And so like, okay, on one end of the valley is the Phoenix Comicon, and then the second thing is that this valley is like the last bulwark against this last fortress against like this neighboring continent where there are all of these like savage barbarian creatures that want to kill us all, and so like it's important that we honor like the sacrifices of these troops and represent the fortress of Garrison. And so like okay, like on one side of the valley you would have the Princess Memorial, on the other side of the valley you have Garrison, and that way I was able to depict like all of the detail of like the various temples that no one in the capital would care about, but we care about them in the first book. So yeah, it's a matter of like finding a balance between like what is going to be relevant to the reader, like what is the reader going to be curious about, what benchmarks will the reader want to be able to reference instead of like, okay, like this is here, this is there, okay, I can follow along now. Yeah, just like kind of like finding that balance. And I think that, I mean, like, how much detail you put into the actual book, I mean, of course, like as a writer, that's something that I don't have input on, and just like whatever you and your editor agree on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. There's a writer from the 1920s that did a lot in Clark Ashton Smith, and most of his short stories are contained in this hyperborean cycle, where empires kind of rise from the ashes of another over a relatively short period of time. I was just wondering if you've ever had to make a map where the lore and world building are contained within the map itself, as well as like historical depth. If you ever had to make a map, or another example would be like the Dark Souls series, if you're familiar with that, where kingdoms are supplanting other kingdoms like hundreds of years, and you got to show that in the map itself.
I think that the map that I've done that kind of addresses that best, I suppose, is Michael's Shadow Out series, where like in the last several years, like people have like discovered this like alternate dimension that's sort of sandwiched next to ours, and with that comes like magic into our culture. And so it's this military fantasy series by Michael, who's like has an incredible military pedigree and is also like a massive D&D geek. And kind of like in tribute to Mike, I have kind of, if you would visualize like a general's desk that has like all of these maps just kind of like sandwiched on top of each other essentially. And some of these would be like military maps that would show like, okay, like at this point is like we're tracking this character, and here's where he was, here where he was, and here's where he was here. And then like underneath that, I had a map that would have been recently like created, hand-drawn by the people that had been exploring this kind of alternate world. And because it's the world we know, suddenly having magic thrust upon it, like the people that would be best equipped to process, to comprehend this world would be the geeks. Because like we already live in that kind of world as far as we're concerned. And so I had these maps that looked like very military and precise, piled on top of maps that looked like they were created for a D&D campaign. And so just kind of like having those juxtaposed with each other allowed me to, I guess, like imply that type of like paradigm shift in this world.
Where's the best place for me to start reading?
Absolutely. So look at the maps that most excite you. So like if there are book series that you really love that have maps in them, like look at the maps and try to figure out like what it is about these maps that make you think is so cool. Like when I was your age, I was obsessed with a book called The Phantom Tollbooth. And in that book, there's the most beautiful map in the beginning of it, created by the illustrator Jules Nefer, you look at this map and you want to experience that world. There are all sorts of, there's really funny wordplay, there are really great puns, there are like strange shapes, like there's one area called the doldrums, where it's just like, it looks like spaghetti noodles that were just like thrown on a page, just this like crazy maze that you could never imagine getting out of once you got into it. And like, when I was looking at this map, like I wanted to explore this world, and it just fascinated me. And so as you're creating your own maps, think about like what is special about each place that you're going to represent. Like I know that in the map for Winnie the Pooh, it has it looks like it was drawn to be created by Christopher Robin and like the book series illustrated by Christopher Robin with help from this illustrator. And so it includes like all the places that are important to Christopher Robin. So it has his house, it has Tyr's house, and owls and penguins and where Root plays around. And then they also include references to like heffalumps here. Like I don't know what a heffalump is. Like I want to read this book and find out what heffalumps are. So find ways of making people as curious to explore those worlds as you are. Good question. Thank you very much.
Cameron?
Yeah.
There you go.
What's your opinion of the world in Xenoblade Chronicles?
I don't know it.
No, sorry.
You should play that, it's really good.
Okay. My parents never allowed me to have a video game console in the house when I was growing up, and so I feel like I kind of missed that boat.
I was curious. I'm making a map for my own book, and I wanted to know how you got the coastlines and stuff like that to actually look like it's a thing that would exist in real life.
In some ways, I sometimes cheat. Like I'll pull up Google Maps and like find an interesting coastline, and then I'll flip it in weird ways, and just so it's no longer recognizable. And then like sometimes I'll like not directly trace, but like do a little bit of like variation from that tracing, just so I have a better sense of like what kind of scale creates these types of coastlines. So yeah, I cheat is the answer.
Okay, so what I wanted to ask you is, if you have a world, let's say, that's not including established civilization, so to speak, and has more of a nomadic culture, it's more of a natural world, similar to like Jane Cameron's Avatar, how would you depict that in a map?
I would recommend like going to natural history museums and like looking at the types of like from like the resources that these people have, like the types of art that they create, the types of weapons they create, the baskets, like all the tools people create just to live their regular lives. You can from that intuit like, okay, like, well, what grows there? Like do they raise certain animals? And from there, like, okay, like imagine in your world what types of animals exist. Like on Pandora, you have all of these like six-legged animals, and like that plays into like a lot of like the design concept of that world. You have all like the glowing structures and like bioluminescence, and so imagine like what that culture's art looks like. Imagine what that culture's like regular day-to-day like resources look like, and then try to include that type of iconography, like with the Codex Alera, because the like what's called fury crafting, like their magic system essentially is like essential to their way of life. For the border, I had just little icons of or like border patterns that sort of subtly made reference to each school of fury crafting, like snake, air, water, fire, heart, go planet. And yeah, so just kind of like figure out what types of like art these people would create, and then figure out a way to represent that.
Have you ever gotten close to finishing a map, but realized you forgot something important?
Like it wasn't so bad that I had to like redo massive portions, or actually at the time you did. It was the massive drizzle for the Iron Myriad Chronicles, and like he in addition to representing like the 9 realms of the Norse, like this world tree, he also wanted me to depict like the animals that live on the world tree. So like Ratatos, this world that runs up and down it, and like this eagle that lives at the top of it, and the world serpent that I cannot pronounce that encircles Midgard. And one of the things that was kind of like most difficult to figure out how to like visually wrangle and like on the lowest level, we have like all of these like rivers that go into this sort of central rift, and it was such a challenge to figure out like, how to like individually number each of these rivers, but then still actually be able to see the rivers, like graphically depict all of these things that was still going to be legible in a paperback. And then like once I finally got that to work, I realized, oh my god, I forgot Nidhogg, which is this like little like lizard creature that like nibbles at the bottom of the roots of this world tree. And so I had to kind of go back and okay, like if I have to fit this creature in here, where am I going to fit all the numbers? And so yeah, artist problems.
Thanks. Thank you.
We've got, looks like about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to ask the last question here. What's your favorite medium to use?
We had a question over by the door.
By the door? Oh, yes, please.
I was just wondering, do you draw by hand or do you use a computer? Or?
That goes back to the, my desire to make every map look like it was done by a different person representing a different culture. And so I try to change up my media on as many maps as I can. So some of the maps that represent kind of older cultures, I will do hand-drawn. Then I'll like scan them into Photoshop and kind of maneuver things around from there and do all the shading and such. Then some of the maps, like the Cinder Spires map, I want to look very like exacting and specific, and so doing that in Photoshop is easiest for me. And actually with the Cinder Spires map, Jim actually also commissioned me to do schematics for this airship Predator, and so thanks to my 3D background, I was able to like sculpt the ship in 3D, and like we had a back and forth, like okay, like how exactly does this fit together? How does this work? Like what? Like, how big would the ship have to be in order to accommodate a crew of this size, and all of the resources they would need? And so, and then I like worked this 3D model into maybe some of the into the map itself. So yeah, it completely depends on what the author's world requires.
Thank you.
Yes, in the back.
When you're drawing, do you use a lot of reference images?
Oh yes, definitely. Just because a lot of the map making that I do, it requires you to be able to like draw a werewolf. It requires you to be able to draw like terror birds. It requires you to draw all of these things that like I would not necessarily have practiced drawing, that I haven't really perfected. And so like being able to look at like historical reference, other artists' depictions of creatures and such, just to kind of like get proportions right, is of massive help. And I think that a lot of artists, especially when starting out, sometimes feel like using references is somehow cheating. It is not. Like the greatest artists use visual reference, and so like yeah, it's essential.
What is your favorite medium to use? I have some tricky ones.
I don't know if I have a favorite. I love being able to kind of like go back and forth between using Photoshop and hand drawing, or just like using a graphics tablet and like hand drawing directly into Photoshop. I know that like I wouldn't have been able to like on paper do all of the intricate Norse knotwork that I created for the Grizzle map for Tim Hearn's series, just because it required so much like drawing lines, erasing, and that was like a solid week of just like looking, like staring at this really fiddly knotwork, and I think that I don't have eyes anymore.
Any other questions?
Do you ever consult with cartographers or?
That's something I haven't actually done yet.
I mean, I know it's a fantasy and photography is like the real world, but just for reference, I'm just curious, because I always hear about illustrators that are fantasy map makers that are cartographers that go into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that because because what I'm doing is so different from what contemporary cartographers are doing, it kind of goes into like what different cultures value, and like today's cultures like generally value like exactitude and like satellite certainty. I mean, like there are absolutely like modern cartographers that are doing like things that are not that, and doing so very beautifully. But I find it more useful to reference the works of cartographers that are no longer alive. So like Jodocus Hondius is he kind of pioneered the map-making style that we associate with like fantasy maps. And so like looking at his work, looking at the works of other artists that have kind of created fantastical worlds like Bernard Slaugh's, and I can never remember the name of it, it's like 20 words long, but like the most ancient map of fairyland set forth by something or other. And that map was essential when doing the brainstorming process for the Toby Day books. Yeah, so just, yeah, I tend to look at older things because with the exception of the Shadow Ops series, in which case that's I guess the one time that I consulted with like more contemporary cartography notions. Like I did a lot of work with like the GIS software, because I was I wanted to have like open source like maps of like the New York area and like India and stuff, and like if I copied stuff from Google Maps, like it wouldn't be the right resolution, and I'd have to get permission, yada yada yada. Like yeah, open source, way to go. So yeah, that's I guess the only time that I've worked with map makers that are still alive.
Yeah.
Yes.
You hang out on our map making?
Not as much as I should. Like there's such ridiculously cool stuff there, but yeah, I haven't done much of that. Like I typically go to our map making and like our imaginary maps when I'm like brainstorming for future projects or brainstorming for current projects, but it's not something I do on a day-to-day basis.
So suppose you were asked to make maps for, say, 3 different worlds that are going to be visited on an epic sci-fi adventure, and the author were to give you descriptions of the places that he wanted to have on the map, but then would give you a lot of freedom otherwise. How would you go about doing that?
So it depends on if you want it to be like in the point of view of like that main character, like with the Gulliver's Travels things, like you had like very different worlds that Gulliver was visiting, but they were all in the same like familiar map making style because like Gulliver would be the one making those maps, and so he would have one consistent viewpoint, one consistent style. Versus if these maps depicted were created in-world by 3 completely different artists from 3 completely different backgrounds with 3 different sets of priorities. So yeah, it just comes down to like what you imagine is the point of view for those illustrations. And if you know someone like that, hire them.
We just have a few more minutes left. I looked on the Phoenix Comicon app, it doesn't have where you're going to be located.
I'm going immediately after this, like until they kick me out for the next panel on like Fantastic Beasts. That sounds really cool. I'm just going to be signing some of my map posters here, and then otherwise in the convention, you can find me tagging along with Jim Butcher. Like generally, whenever he'll be signing, I'll also be signing. I have my maps for Alara, Cinder Spires, October Day, and Kevin Hearn, Iron Druid Chronicles, and yeah, they look really fantastic on the wall. So either come see me here after this panel or like track down Jim.
All right, I do have Jim Butcher signing on the 27th, so Saturday at 12 p.m.
He has a number of signings, like some at the Bard's Tower downstairs, some at the Dali Jewelry downstairs, and then that official signing that they listed. I think actually, oh, he had the other official signing earlier today, so that's why.
You want to set up?
Oh, did
How much are your signatures?
the signature is free. The maps depend on like how much it costs me to print them. So like some of the more basic color poster illustrations are 30, black and whites are 25. The Cinder Spires ones actually got printed in copper foil, which is like a really expensive process, but looks so jaw-droppingly beautiful in person. Like I couldn't imagine depicting them any other way. And for those, I have to charge $60. But yeah, it's exciting. And then they're cheaper here than they are on my website. So track them down.
They are really gorgeous. I looked at them on her website. We're going to give her time to set up to sign for her maps, and that